Some revelations come to us like silent storms, transforming our reality without us noticing the exact moment when everything changed. It was just a corporate dinner, one of those social obligations that accompany the life of a wife. I never imagined that night would be the beginning of an overwhelming discovery about myself. When his eyes met mine for the first time, I felt something awaken inside me, something I thought was lost forever. And you, have you ever felt your life revolutionized by a single look? If you've ever been through something similar, leave your comment. Sometimes, the most transformative encounters are those we least expect. He was there, imposing in his impeccable suit, talking to my husband about business. There was something magnetic about his presence, the way he gestured when speaking, the deep laugh that echoed through the room, the graying hair that gave him an irresistible elegance. He was the type of man who commanded attention effortlessly, mature, confident, with that charm that only years can sculpt. When they introduced me, he held my hand for a few seconds longer than necessary, and in that touch I felt an electric current course through my entire being. His voice was deep, enveloping, each word pronounced with a confidence that hypnotized me. During dinner, I caught his discreet glances in my direction. There was something different there, an intensity that made me blush like a teenager. We talked about trivial subjects, but beneath the surface, a silent language was developing between us. Each of his smiles seemed to carry a hidden meaning. Each word was carefully chosen. I felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. It was as if he could see through the social masks I wore, reaching directly to my essence. My husband talked about work, oblivious to the revolution happening right beside him. At the end of the night, when we were saying goodbye, he whispered softly, "Just for me, it was a pleasure meeting you. I hope our paths cross again." His words echoed in my mind for days. I began to question dormant desires that I didn't even know existed. On the way home, my husband casually commented on how his boss seemed to have enjoyed meeting me. If he knew that encounter had planted a seed of transformation in me, a restlessness that would grow each day. Have you ever felt your soul instantly recognize someone, as if it were a reunion from past lives? The following days were strange. I found myself thinking about him at random moments while preparing breakfast, during grocery shopping, before falling asleep. There was something in his eyes that disturbed me deliciously. It wasn't just physical attraction, although that existed overwhelmingly. It was something deeper, as if he had awakened a part of me that had been hibernating for years. I began to observe myself in the mirror more attentively, noticing details I had ignored for too long. My hair, my eyes, the way I smiled, it was as if I were rediscovering myself through his gaze. My husband didn't notice my subtle transformation. He continued immersed in his routines, in the same old subjects. I was beginning to realize how our life had become mechanical, predictable. There were no more surprises, no more discoveries. We were two strangers sharing the same roof, following well-rehearsed scripts of a marriage that worked on paper but had lost its soul. Passion had transformed into companionship, companionship into habit, and habit into a colorless existence. When did we stop truly looking at each other? When did we stop surprising one another? The encounters began to repeat with a frequency that seemed more than coincidence. Company events, business lunches where I accompanied my husband, social gatherings. Each time we saw each other, the tension between us grew like a symphony gaining intensity. He always found a way to stay close, to initiate conversations that seemed banal but carried profound subtext. There was a silent dance happening, careful steps of approach and retreat. I felt like a tightrope walker, excited by the danger and at the same time terrified by the possibility of falling. One afternoon, in a cafe, while my husband was on the phone resolving work issues, he leaned toward me and said, "You have a special brightness in your eyes when you smile. Your husband is a lucky man." His words made me tremble inside. It wasn't just a compliment, it was a veiled declaration, a recognition of something blooming between us. I began to dress more carefully when I knew I would see him, choosing clothes that enhanced my femininity. Each encounter became a careful performance, where every gesture, every look, every word was calculated to transmit a message that couldn't be said openly. Guilt and desire began to wage a battle in my heart. Part of me knew I was entering dangerous territory, but another part, a part that had been neglected for so long, yearned for more. He awakened in me a woman I thought I had lost, a version of myself that pulsed with life and passion. It was as if I had been a flower slowly withering, and his looks were rays of sun making me bloom again. But with the blooming also came the painful awareness of how much time had passed in the shadows, of how many years I had wasted being just a faded version of myself. The conversations between us became increasingly intimate, even when they happened in the presence of other people. We developed a particular language made of meaningful looks and complicit smiles. When he talked about literature, I knew he was talking about passion. When he commented on travels, he was describing escapes he would like to make with me. When he mentioned music, he was creating a soundtrack for the moments we lived. It was communication in code, a language of the heart that only we two understood. My husband participated in the conversations without perceiving the hidden layers of meaning that circulated around him. I began to live two parallel lives. One was a dedicated wife, who fulfilled her domestic and social duties efficiently. The other was a woman rediscovering her sensuality, her intelligence, her capacity to fascinate and be fascinated. This second woman existed only in the moments when our gazes crossed, when he whispered comments that made my heart race, when his presence transformed boring meetings into electrifying encounters. I felt like an actress playing two very different roles, and increasingly the second character seemed more real than the first. It was during an art exhibition that everything changed definitively. My husband had canceled at the last minute. Work, always work. I thought about not going, but something propelled me. And there he was, observing a painting with the same intensity with which he looked at me. When he saw me, his face lit up in a way that made me melt. "What a happy coincidence," he said, but his eyes revealed that perhaps it wasn't so casual. He wore a cashmere sweater that highlighted his broad shoulders, and for the first time we were truly alone, without the presence of my husband or other work colleagues. We walked through the gallery, side by side, commenting on the works, but actually talking about ourselves through the metaphors of art. When we stopped in front of a painting depicting a couple in a passionate embrace, he turned to me with an expression that mixed desire and vulnerability. "It's been so long since I felt this connection with someone," he confessed in a low voice. "You awaken in me something I thought was lost." The air between us vibrated with an almost palpable tension. I could feel the warmth of his body close to mine, could perceive the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with his natural masculine aroma. In that moment, with my heart beating irregularly, I asked what was happening to us. He came closer, almost whispering, "You make me lose my mind. And at the same time, you make me feel more alive than I have in years." It was the confession I feared and desired to hear. The world around us seemed to disappear, and for an instant, only we two existed, suspended between what was and what could be. His hands moved as if they wanted to touch my face, but stopped in the air, respecting the invisible limits that still separated us. When was the last time someone made you feel completely alive? The days that followed were of inner torment. His words constantly echoed in my mind, and I found myself divided between two worlds. There was the life I knew, safe, predictable, but empty of passion, and there was this new possibility, intense and frightening. I looked at my husband during dinner and felt like a stranger in my own life. Was it too late to rediscover who I really was? He ate while watching television, completely oblivious to the turmoil happening beside him. How could two people be so physically close and so emotionally distant? I began to question everything: my marriage, my choices, my abandoned dreams. He had awakened not just desire, but a hunger to live fully that I had suppressed for years. It was more than attraction. It was the recognition of a part of me that clamored for freedom, for authenticity, for a connection that transcended the everyday. I remembered who I was before marriage, the dreams I had filed away, the passions I had set aside in the name of stability. Was there still time to rescue that woman? Did she still exist somewhere inside me, waiting to be free? The guilt weighed heavily, but there was also a sensation of awakening, as if I were emerging from a long sleep. When he called, inviting me for coffee, just to talk, he said, I knew I was reaching a point of no return. Each choice from that moment would define not only my future, but who I would choose to be. I accepted the invitation with a mixture of anxiety and excitement I hadn't felt in years. It was as if I were preparing for a first date, choosing each piece of clothing carefully, each accessory with intention. I was preparing to meet not just him, but myself. I met him on a rainy afternoon in a small, discreet cafe far from the places we frequented. His hands trembled slightly as he held the cup, revealing that he was as nervous as I was. I know this is complex, he began, but I can no longer pretend I don't feel what I feel. His gray eyes stared at me with an intensity that completely disarmed me. There was a vulnerability in his confession that touched me deeply. This powerful, confident man was exposing himself in a way that made him even more attractive. The rain created a curtain of intimacy around us, isolating us from the outside world. "And what do you feel?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper. He extended his hand across the table, lightly touching mine. The contact was like an electric shock that ran up my entire arm. I feel that I found a part of me that was lost. You inspire me, challenge me, make me want to be a better man. The rain beat on the window as if echoing the turmoil in my heart. His words were like music to a soul that had forgotten how to dance. For the first time in years, I felt truly desired, not just physically, but in all my complexity as a woman. In that moment, I understood that I was facing a crossroads that would define the rest of my life. I could retreat to the safety of the known, to the comfortable but lusterless life I had built, or take a step toward the unknown, where perhaps I would find the truest version of who I was. His fingers gently caressed mine, and each touch was a promise of discoveries, of rediscovered passions, of a life lived in vibrant colors instead of shades of gray. But it was also a promise of complications, of pain, of difficult choices. True love rarely comes without a price to be paid. I rose from the table with my heart in conflict, his words still echoing in my ears. He remained there, watching me with those eyes that seemed to see my soul. We didn't say goodbye. We both knew that wasn't an ending, but a pause, a moment of reflection before a decision that would change everything. There were no easy answers, no paths without consequences. There was only the choice between remaining asleep in the safety of the known or awakening completely to a life of infinite possibilities, even if that meant destroying everything I had built until then. I walked in the rain, feeling each drop like a baptism, a transformation. The world seemed different, more vivid, more real. The colors were more intense, the sound sharper, every sensation amplified by the emotional revolution happening inside me. I thought of all the women who, like me, reach a moment in life where they need to choose between security and passion, between what is expected and what is desired. Some discoveries about ourselves come too late, others come exactly at the right moment. The question was, would I have the courage to embrace this discovery, regardless of the consequences? During the days that followed, I lived in a kind of emotional limbo. Every daily activity seemed surreal, as if I were a spectator of my own life. I tidied the house, prepared meals, talk to my husband about trivial matters, but my mind was elsewhere, reliving every moment of that encounter in the cafe. His words resonated in my mind like a mantra. "You make me lose my mind." Did I have the right to make someone lose their mind? Did I have the right to lose my own? I looked at my reflection in the mirror and saw a divided woman. There was the responsible wife, who fulfilled her duties and kept up appearances. But there was also another woman emerging, one who pulsed with repressed desires and forgotten dreams. This second woman frightened and fascinated me at the same time. She represented all the possibilities I had set aside in the name of stability, all the paths not taken that could still be explored. It was as if I were being confronted with all the versions of myself that could have existed. My husband began to notice my distraction, but interpreted it as fatigue or stress. He offered to take me on vacation, suggested I look for new hobbies, even mentioned the possibility of having children, a subject that had been archived for years. It was ironic how my existential crisis was awakening in him an attention that had disappeared long ago, but it was too late for these gestures. The awakening I was experiencing went far beyond what small adjustments in our routine could resolve. It was a fundamental transformation of who I was and what I wanted from life. Weeks passed without contact with him, but his presence was constant in my thoughts. I found myself looking for him at social events, hoping my husband would mention his name casually during conversations about work. His absence was almost as intense as his presence had been. It was as if a part of me had been awakened and now refused to return to sleep. I had tasted a possibility of a different life, and now everything else seemed insipid in comparison. Then he called. His voice on the phone made my heart race instantly. "I need to see you," he said simply. There were no pleas or long explanations, just a need declared with the same raw honesty that had marked our last conversation. I agreed to meet him, knowing that this time there would be no more subtle games or careful conversations. We had reached the point where masks needed to fall and truths needed to be confronted. Have you ever reached a moment in life where you knew you could no longer run from a fundamental decision? The meeting was arranged at a small discreet restaurant, far from any place where we could be recognized. When I arrived, he was already there, and the way his eyes lit up when he saw me was a powerful reminder of how much I had missed that connection. He wore a blue shirt that highlighted his eyes, and there was something different in his posture, a determination that wasn't present in our previous encounters. It was as if he too had gone through a process of self-discovery during our time apart. "I thought a lot about us," he began, without beating around the bush. "About what this means, about the consequences, about what we're willing to risk." His frankness disarmed me. There were no more subtle games or veiled insinuations. We were finally talking openly about the elephant in the room, the fact that we had fallen in love with each other despite all the complications this represented. "And what was your conclusion?" I asked, although part of me feared the answer. What would I do if he said it was better to keep our distance? What would I do if he said the opposite? "My conclusion is that I can no longer live pretending you don't exist," he replied, his eyes fixed on mine. "That I can no longer pretend I don't feel what I feel. Life is too short for us to waste a connection like this." His words were both a declaration of love and an invitation to leap together into the abyss of the unknown. He extended his hand across the table, and this time I held it without hesitation. The touch was like recognizing a home I didn't even know I was looking for. It was more than physical desire, it was a recognition of souls that complemented each other inexplicably. We spent hours talking, finally free to express everything we had kept for so long. He told me about his life, about the dreams he had archived, about how he felt trapped in an existence that didn't correspond to who he really was. I shared my own journey of self-discovery, the feeling of having lived as a shadow of myself for so long. It was liberating to finally have someone who understood the complexity of my feelings, someone who didn't judge my search for authenticity as selfishness or irresponsibility. When it came time to say goodbye, we both knew that something fundamental had changed. We were no longer two people trying to resist an attraction. We were two people who had found each other and were willing to explore this discovery, regardless of complications. He walked me to the car, and before I got in, he gently held my face in his hands. "I don't know exactly how we're going to navigate this," he said, "but I know I can no longer live without you in my life." It was a promise and a confession, a commitment to discover together how to build something true in the midst of all the complications. I drove home in a state of complete transformation. Every traffic light, every curve in the road seemed symbolic of the journey I was about to begin. I was no longer the same woman who had left home a few hours before. I had crossed an invisible line, made a decision that would change not only my future, but my own identity. For the first time in years, I felt completely alive, completely present, completely myself. It was frightening and liberating at the same time. Arriving home, I looked at the life I had built with new eyes. The tidy house, the carefully chosen furniture, the photographs that documented years of apparent happiness, everything seemed to belong to a different person. It wasn't that I despised this life. I had simply grown beyond it. It was as if I had been a butterfly trying to live forever inside the cocoon, and had finally discovered I had wings. The question now was whether I would have the courage to use them, knowing that flying meant leaving behind the security of the familiar. My husband came home that night talking animatedly about a new project at work. He casually mentioned that his boss had commented on our hospitality during corporate dinners. If he knew that the man he was talking about had become the center of an emotional revolution in my life. I listened to his words as if they came from far away, participating in the conversation with the part of me that still functioned on autopilot, while my heart and mind were completely focused on other possibilities. That night, lying in bed next to the man with whom I had shared so many years, I felt lonelier than ever. It wasn't that he was a bad person, it was simply that we had become strangers to each other, sharing a physical space, but living in completely separate emotional worlds. How long had we spent like this, side by side, but essentially alone? How long had I accepted this togetherness and solitude as normal until someone showed me what a true connection was? The following days were a succession of stolen moments. Discreet messages, phone calls when I was sure to be alone, carefully planned meetings to avoid raising suspicions. It was like living a secret life within the official life, and this duplicity was both exciting and exhausting. Each small lie, "I'm going to the supermarket," "meeting with a friend," "I need to resolve some things," was a brick in the construction of a parallel reality where I could be truly myself. Our encounters became sanctuaries of honesty and passion. We talked about literature, art, philosophy, politics, subjects I hadn't discussed with anyone for years. He challenged my intellect, provoked my thoughts, made me question ideas I had accepted without question for too long. It was as if my mind had been in hibernation and was finally awakening to its full capacity. Beyond physical attraction, there was an intellectual connection that nourished me in ways I didn't know were possible. But it was the emotional intimacy that most addicted me. The way he listened, really listened, when I spoke. How his eyes focused completely on me, as if in that moment I were the only person in the universe who mattered. The ease with which I could share my fears, my insecurities, my most secret dreams, without fear of judgment or misunderstanding. It was as if he had the key to parts of me that I myself had forgotten existed. When was the last time you felt truly heard by someone? Gradually, I began to understand that what I was experiencing wasn't just a passing passion or a midlife crisis. It was a fundamental awakening to who I really was and to the kind of life I really wanted to live. He wasn't just an escape from my reality. He was a mirror that reflected possibilities I had buried under years of conformity and compromise. Through his eyes, I saw myself not as the dedicated but slightly invisible wife I had become, but as an interesting, desirable woman full of unrealized potential. The guilt was still present, but had changed in nature. It was no longer the simple guilt of betraying my husband's trust, although that still weighed heavily. It was a more complex guilt, related to the years I had wasted not being true to myself, to the dreams I had abandoned, to the life I had let pass without really living it. How could I have accepted for so long an existence that was just a pale shadow of what could have been? Then came the moment I knew would eventually arrive, the need to make a definitive decision. I could no longer live indefinitely between two worlds, being to different people depending on the context. The tension was beginning to affect my health, my sleep, my ability to function normally. Something had to give, and I knew this choice would define not only my future, but who I would be for the rest of my life. During a particularly intense conversation, he touched on the subject we had both avoided. "I can no longer accept crumbs of time and attention," he said, with a sadness that broke my heart. "I deserve more than that, and so do you. I deserve someone who can love me openly, and you deserve the chance to live a life that is truly yours." His words were a gentle ultimatum, a declaration that our current situation wasn't sustainable long term. The time had come to choose. I spent days in agony, weighing all possible considerations. There was the practical question of financial stability, of the house we had built together, of social and family commitments. There was the fear of judgment, of gossip, of being seen as the woman who abandoned a stable marriage for a passion. But there was also the most important consideration. Could I continue living a lie, being less than I could be, wasting the time I had left in a life that didn't truly belong to me? The answer came on a morning like any other. I woke up next to my husband and, for the first time, instead of feeling guilty or divided, I felt crystal clarity. I looked at him sleeping peacefully and felt a wave of genuine affection, not romantic love, but the affection one has for someone who was important in our journey. He deserved more than a wife who was physically present but emotionally absent. He deserved the chance to find someone who would love him with the intensity I felt for another man. I got up and walked to the mirror. The woman looking back at me was no longer divided or conflicted. She was a woman who had made a decision and was at peace with it. It wouldn't be easy. There would be difficult conversations, complicated processes, moments of pain and regret. But for the first time in years, I was following my heart instead of just fulfilling external expectations. I was choosing courage instead of convenience, passion instead of predictability.